The jungle hums, a constant, oppressive symphony of unseen life. But deeper within this emerald tomb, another sound cuts through the natural world. The crisp, rhythmic crack of a bolt-action rifle. A shot fired with precision, followed by a quiet thud. It's 1972, 27 years after the world ended its bloodiest conflict. But for the man holding that rifle, the war rages on. He moves through the dense undergrowth, a specter of a forgotten army, his uniform tattered but meticulously mended, his rifle a gleaming extension of his will. He is Hiroo Onoda, a ghost of the Emperor's army, and he is still fighting World War II. How does a man fight a war for 3 decades after it's over? How does he ignore every sign, every leaflet, every shouted plea that the world has moved on? This is not just a story of survival. It is a terrifying journey into the absolute limits of human conviction and the devastating power of indoctrination. To understand Onoda, we must go back to December 1944. The tide of the war had turned against Japan, yet the Imperial High Command clung to a desperate doctrine: absolute resistance. Surrender was not an option. This was the creed instilled in men like Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda, a young intelligence officer. He'd undergone specialized training at the Nakano School, a commando academy focused on guerrilla warfare. Their most fundamental lesson: never surrender, never be taken alive. On December 26, 1944, Onoda was dispatched to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His orders from Major Yoshimi Taniguchi were explicit: you are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you. Until then, you were to lead the guerrillas. These were not just orders, they were a sacred trust, and Onoda took them to heart with an intensity that would define his life. When American forces landed in February 1945, the Japanese resistance was overwhelmed. Most were killed or captured, but Onoda, along with 3 other men, Akatsu, Shimada, and Kozuka, melted into the jungle. They weren't retreating. They were executing their orders. They were becoming ghosts. The initial years were a blur of skirmishes and isolation. They scavenged for food: bananas, coconuts, sometimes even cattle stolen from local villagers. They maintained their rifles with an almost religious devotion. Their mission: gather intelligence and await the glorious return of the Imperial Army. Meanwhile, the war rushed to its conclusion. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The formal surrender on September 2nd, 1945, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. Except for 4 men on Lubang Island, aircraft dropped leaflets printed with surrender orders. The war ended on August 15th. Come down from the mountains! But to Onoda, these were crude enemy propaganda, psychological warfare designed to trick honorable soldiers into surrender. His training had explicitly warned him of this. He burned the leaflets. The years blurred. The mental toll was immense. In 1949, Private Akatsu, weary and sick, broke away and surrendered. He tried to help search parties, but Onoda and his remaining comrades saw him as a traitor, forced to act as an enemy stooge. Then, in 1954, tragedy struck. Corporal Shimada was shot and killed in a skirmish with a local search party. Now, Onitoreman, Onodoran, Kosuka. The bond between them solidified into an unbreakable pact. They were the last defenders of the Emperor. They continued their guerrilla campaign, stealing rice from farmers, ambushing local police. These weren't random acts of violence. In their minds, they were strategic operations against an enemy occupying their territory. Leaflets continued to rain down, now with photos of their families and messages from their brothers. Onoda scrutinized every detail. The typeface was wrong, the photos doctored. He found proof in every perceived flaw that these were clever fakes. In 1959, the Japanese government officially declared Onoda dead. Then, in 1972, Private Kozuka was shot and killed during a clash with local police while trying to burn harvested rice, an act of economic warfare in Onoda's mind. Onoda was now truly alone. For the first time in 27 years, he was the sole combatant in a war. Only he was fighting. The solitude would have broken most men. But Onoda was not most men. He continued his patrols, convinced the Imperial Army would return for him. The outside world, however, refused to forget. After Kozuka's death and the recovery of his rifle, the world realized a shocking truth. Hiroo Onoda was real. News of the last Japanese holdout captivated the globe, a living fossil of a forgotten era. But how could anyone convince a man who had dedicated his life to disbelieving every attempt at contact? Enter Norio Suzuki, a young Japanese adventurer who had a singular, almost absurd goal: to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman in that order. Suzuki was not a soldier. He was an idealist who believed he could connect with Onoda on a human level. In February 1974, after 4 days of searching the jungle, he heard a rustle. A gaunt, weathered figure emerged, carrying a rifle. It was Hiroo. Onoda. Suzuki explained that the war was over. He showed Onoda photos of modern Japan, newspapers, proof that the world had fundamentally changed. But Onoda, hardened by decades of deception, remained skeptical. He grilled Suzuki for hours. Still, he had one unshakable condition for surrender. His orders forbade him to surrender unless relieved by a direct superior officer. Only Major Taniguchi could release him from his duty. Suzuki relayed this message back to Japan. The government found Major Taniguchi, who was now working as a bookseller. On March 9, 1974, the major, dressed in his old uniform, was flown to Lubang. He trekked into the jungle and found Onoda. For Onoda, this was the culmination of 29 years of unwavering duty. His major. Finally, with tears in his eyes, Major Taniguchi formally relieved Lieutenant Onoda of his command. The war was over. Onoda stood ramrod straight, snapped a final salute, and meticulously handed over his rifle, his sword, and 500 rounds of ammunition, all in perfect working order. His duty was done. He had officially surrendered. 29 years after the war had ended for everyone else. The images of Onoda emerging from the jungle are haunting. He was 52 years old, with the eyes of a man who had seen nothing but war for 3 decades. He was met with a hero's welcome in Japan, a mixture of AOE respect and profound sadness. He struggled to adjust to a world he barely recognized, a world of skyscrapers and unimaginable prosperity. He was eventually pardoned by the Philippine government for his actions during his long war. Hiroo Onoda's story is a chilling reminder of the power of belief and the psychological scars of conflict. He embodied never surrender with a literal interpretation that defies imagination. His story leaves us with echoing questions about duty, reality, and the limits of the human spirit. What would you do? How long would you fight? What would it take for your war to finally end? Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you next time.